We are back with more NFL coverage, and in this one, I'll be covering all the developments surrounding the conference championship weekend. So, to get straight into it, we'd first start out with a retirement update as Dan Skipper, the offensive tackle for the Lions, will retire from the NFL after 8 seasons in the league. Now, he is a bit of a weird case. Obviously, when you hear the name Dan Skipper, you're going to hearken immediately back to the trick play he had with the Lions that garnered him his first and only NFL touchdown back in 2024. Outside of that, though, he'd been with the team for multiple stints. He was originally there in 2017 and then rejoined in 2019. He's been a bit of a rotational piece. You know, in terms of starts, like they're far off in terms of the actual games he appeared in. Like, when you look here, it states that he only started in 16 games out of 69 overall. He also spent time in that 2019 season, I suppose, before a particular point in time when you could still make acquisitions through the waiver wire. He was originally with Houston in that season to add another layer to it. So when you look at him, it's probably him just wanting to really take on a different path in his own life, which is not something you can blame him for. He was a fairly productive tackle for the team when he was playing, but to lose him in the situation on their end, the way they see it, yes, he's probably got a lot more that we don't know about him on the surface in terms of influence in the particular locker room. Like, we all know how much of a struggle it was for the Lions this season overall. And we're not, bodies, we're not players in that situation going in there every day, trying to train, trying to go through the motions in this situation. So we don't know how that genuinely feels, but you could argue for Skipper in this case, it might have gotten to him just a little bit. Because, you have to understand, it was literally so close for the Lions. Emotions were that high, they had a chance to contend just like that. And in an instant, it withered away. It feels as though it has not returned for them in the past couple of years. Despite all of that being said. Also, there could be a number of other things going on with Skipper behind the scenes that we don't particularly know about. I didn't hear anything about any reasoning behind why he chose to retire. He's only 31 years old, which isn't, I guess the offensive line can be a demanding position, and we have seen other guys in the past, serviceable or not, when it comes to, offensive linemen, choose to call on a career in their early 30s as a result of a number of different things. So there could be something with that. Yeah, I just wouldn't want to assume anything. Because at the end of the day, there's again nothing wrong with him choosing a different career path and going out on his own terms, if this is the decision that he's making. Wish him nothing but the best moving forward, and I don't think that there's any bad blood being harbored between the two sides. But you just can't look at it from the standpoint of, oh, he's an old guy. No, not really. 31 is, fairly young, especially when it comes to NFL players that last a long time in this league. That's a fairly young age. So, I don't know. When it comes to how everyone moves forward, again, obviously the most important thing for him would be his family. And whatever it is that he may choose to do with them, whether it be him, going off the grid with it and just living a more secluded lifestyle, or just, again, keeping a low enough profile where he's still a man recognized in his community. And I mean, that's fair, right? Considering he's from Colorado, as this Football Reference page alludes to, he could very much be a recognizable figure in that area of the state. So you may end up returning there, just living your life out to, again, the tune of your own control here. Or, again, just potentially move around, whatever he wants to do in this situation. You have to take credit for the fact that, again, he's going to be able to dictate that choice for himself. So, respect to him. Truly. He, again, in football terminology, or in football conversations, may not really go down as a player that would stand out for the general fan. But again, for at least the last few years, Lions fans are definitely going to consider him a fan favorite. And again, anyone who's been around, from the start of his career is going to look back on it and be proud of what he was able to accomplish in the NFL. Especially when it comes to simply just being there. Like, it's not like he was on the best teams. The Lions at that point, in his early stint, were just terrible. And in the Texans, they were seemingly on the up and up. But they still were not considered as a serious ball club just yet. So he'd been through the ringer for his entire career. But by sticking around all this time, he again has been able to be a good quality locker room presence. And sometimes that's what counts in an NFL team setting. You're not going to have a roster chock full of superstars at every single position. It's not going to happen. That's not how it ends up working. You need those glue guys sometimes. You need those guys that, again, keep a low profile, yet do all that they need to do on their end, putting in the time and energy they need to contribute consistently in their role. And one could say that Skipper was doing that, especially as a rotational piece, as he started to, get involved in the offense more and more and more. Like, it was not, we aren't so far out of it to where he'd start to truly be relied upon. Like, they moved him all over the line. The Lions did. He got some snaps at guard in 2022 and then shifted back and forth between the different tackle positions. He logged at least 5 starts in 4 of the last 5 seasons. By far tied for a career high compared to anything else he'd done before that 2022 year. So there was a general trust in what Skipper could do. Understanding that, hey, if one of our main guys goes down, we have a more than capable backup tackle who can handle his own against any defensive end or edge rusher out there. And fittingly, it paid off for him. So that's definitely respectable. Plus, in playing in these reduced snaps, he'd only accounted for 6 penalties in the last 4 seasons when he had been on the field and healthy for this team, or at least on the field and on the active roster if he wasn't, on the practice squad at the specific time. So it's definitely a respectable career. It may not be viewed as anything too crazy by the general fan, but again, those closest to him are definitely going to look back on it and say, hey, whatever relation they may have to him, he ended up doing that and then some in the NFL. No matter what, that can't be taken away from him. Alright, moving on to a hire, as the Cowboys would hire Christian Parker as their new defensive coordinator. He is coming off of serving on the Philadelphia staff as their defensive passing game coordinator. it's kind of weird because, in a way, you needed to find a replacement. Let's just put it like that. Matt Eberflus, the way that he was running that side of the football specifically, as we understood, there was just no way they could get away with bringing his ass back to this team and expecting a different result. That wasn't going to be how this ended up working out at all. They needed a new face in there, and honestly, Parker might not be a bad get. Even with that being said, though, when you look at what happened in this time span, the Cowboys, it goes without saying that in the past 2 seasons, they've been at least second worst or worst in terms of points allowed on the defensive side. And they've been 28th and 30th in yards allowed, respectively, over the past couple seasons as well. One hire does not fix that issue. One hire just simply doesn't. We're talking about damn near 30.1 points per game, essentially. Dead last in the NFL. And that wasn't just because of Matt Eberflus's bullshit scheme on that side. Now, granted, Parker might be able to get a little more out of a few players depending on how he runs his defense. And, it may be able to pay off for a select few of those individual defenders out there. But in terms of team defense, that remains to be seen. As constructed right now, even with Christian Parker being there, even with him potentially showing promise at that role, there's just no way that Cowboys defense is going to improve enough without some form of, intervention, whether it be a trade, whether it be a free agency pickup, whether it be trying to get someone through the draft that is a highly touted cornerback. I really don't know how they take a step forward there. Like, your roster on that side of the ball, as we know right now, of course, we're not in the mode to really have any of that stuff go down just yet. But largely, you may see them keep damn near the exact same roster on that side of the ball. And so the deficiencies of that Cowboys defense would still be all over the place. And that's even with them managing to get multiple first-round picks back down the line for that Micah Parsons deal. So I can't really say that this is going to be a home run hit. If anything, it's not in Parker's control, but again, they have got to find a way to load up that defense, or at least get some capable enough pieces on that side of the ball just to keep up in some of these games. And as for Parker himself, passing game coordinator for the Eagles, when you look at that last season, the Eagles finished 5th in points and 13th in yards. And believe me, they have got all the energy at every position. Still, even with them playing their asses off, especially after the trade deadline and getting their hands on Jalen Phillips and Michael Carter II and even Jair Alexander for the fuck of it, even after that, the Eagles still went on a tough late season slide. Their year in an utter disappointment to the 49ers because of their lack of offense. Like, defensively, you look at it, and for the most part, they did okay, somewhat fine. I mean, let's just put it like this. You see here, you have Football Reference pulled up, and you look at every single one of their games in the schedule, and even though you have to take into account some of the scores of these games and things like that, it is worth noting that the Cowboys only allowed one passer, that being Dak Prescott, of all people, in the second game they had against the Cowboys, in which they gave up a 21-point lead, blew it, and allowed the Cowboys to go and win that game. Now, that shit was an embarrassment. And that defense sputtered out of control in the second half of that game exactly, which may not be the greatest tell for them. But overall, on the entire season, that was the only 300-yard game that allowed, and Prescott had 348 points, or 348 passing yards in that game. Every other game saw them allow under 300 passing yards. And I know it could be a little cherry picked because, again, even when you had that happen, some teams were still able to overcome that. Take the Bears, for example, winning this game despite giving up just 144 yards, man. Think about that shit. Like, that is just insane to think about, dude. And that, ironically enough, was the next week on what would be a 3-game skid for them, as I mentioned already. And we don't even talk about that Chargers game. We said all we needed to say about that game on Monday Night Football in that particular recap. So, from that standpoint, like, Parker could help this defense out mightily. I mean, you compare one 300-yard game all season long for a defense that was asked to do so much, and I mean so much, for this team with their offensive regression, especially in the rushing game. And more often than not, they came through. They made these games competitive and put that Eagles team in position to win quite a few of those. But again, they couldn't figure it out when they needed to, unfortunately. You will take allowing just a single 300-yard game from a quarterback across an entire season compared to having an early stretch to the season where you essentially were just giving up career best games to pretty much every quarterback you faced off against. Every single one. Finding a way to be as efficient as possible, testing you so greatly that even if they weren't known for, attacking a defense with their arm strength, they were chucking these balls down the field, banking on you making a fucking mistake on the back end, and it happening anyways because they could not do anything to stop them whatsoever. And they felt all right until they stopped. We're just going to keep letting it fire down the field and let these opposing quarterbacks light our asses up. That's how it was for Dallas this season. So if Parker can help him take a step forward in that, it's not a bad deal to pick him up at all. He's young too. I think they mentioned he's 34, so you have to credit that. And as always, of course, when it comes to these kinds of decisions, you love to see them actually taking some form of the Rooney Rule, some form of it. It's been much debated over the past few years. That's definitely reasonable. But at least when it comes to actually going through the process of interviewing these coaches, and, you will see some black head coaches get hired, or black coordinators, I should say, potentially be promoted, be given another shot, and that is a good thing to see overall. So it will be interesting to look at how Christian Parker handles this. They've got to be patient if they're the Cowboys, though. Like, yo ass ain't going anywhere. You want to see some form of improvement, and if you don't, then Parker's probably out the door. But at the same time, even with a potential improvement, and even with me just saying, that, hey, you have to be able to take some steps forward from the organization or dysfunctional unit that was Matt Eberflus's defense, especially when it came to his play calling. As much as you want to improve upon that, you also, again, have to be willing to look at the personnel on your team. Do they fit with what Parker does well? Are you asking him to turn around the fortunes of a specific player at a particular position? What is the game plan here? That'll be the next step for the Cowboys, but they cleared up their first move by picking up his services. As for the Ravens, they would hire Jesse Minter as head coach. And honestly, once they mentioned that they were interviewing him for this job, honestly, I mean, you could pretty much pencil it in. Honestly, it would be hard for me to say anything about Jesse Minter that hasn't already been said. He's a great defensive coordinator, and again, as I mentioned yesterday in my recap, you're coming off a season where you lead, or I guess diagnose play calling in schemes for one of the top 5 defenses in the NFL, point blank range. And while he could not help what happened to them, mainly due to short field, in that game against the Patriots in the wild card round, you could give Jesse Minter a lot of credit for how he's been able to elevate some of these guys. Now, naturally, when you're inheriting Derwin James Jr., that is not going to be too difficult. He's already an established product. But when you look at some of the other guys who've been emerging, whether it be Tuli Pelotu this season, whether it be Deion Henley over the past couple of seasons, those kinds of players are on track to be stars in this league. And that is in large reason of where Minter was positioning those guys on the football field. Now, you can't expect a complete and total one-to-one, especially defensively, with him having that kind of mindset. Because, again, your personnel, especially on the front lines, are far older than what the Chargers are doing with both Tuli Pelotu and also getting Jason Oweh at the trade deadline. Like, how interesting is that link up? Like, you have yet another case where the Chargers are finding a way to fuse up with the Ravens. Like, hell, you had Gus Edwards there with Los Angeles last season. And now you have this where Minter has more than enough connection with the Harbaugh family at this point. He was with John Harbaugh with the Ravens prior to 2020. Spent some time in Michigan under John Harbaugh as a DC there, and then followed him to the NFL as he's been coaching that defensive side of the football over the past few years for he'd been there with Jim Harbaugh, and it coached them to, some success on that side of the football. Then came back into the States. Well, not back into the States, but back into the pros after following Jim Harbaugh from there and picking up right where he left off. Like, the Chargers defense was truly dynamic all over the place. It goes without saying. And if you're the Ravens, again, I just don't know. Like, yes, Kyle Hamilton is going to be the focal point. And it'd be very interesting to see what Jesse Minter can pull off with him. But yeah. The pass rush is still underwhelming, and they are going to have to find a way to get into that throughout the offseason. They've got to figure it out. Because to rely on Kyle Van Noy forever is a bit ludicrous. Like, that man is getting up there in age. And you will have some younger guys as well in the squad. But you can really question whether or not they're starting caliber just yet. So, man, they've definitely got some work to do on their end. But it's not a bad initial hire for them. A lot of what had been going on as well is that they don't believe that this benefits Lamar. And again, with a bit of a defensive mind, you don't have the luxury, if you are Jesse Minter, to focus specifically, and I mean directly, into what's going on there. Obviously, he has to be involved. He needs to have a fairly public presence if he's going to have the hands-on experience. It's as simple as that. But, man, to go from a scenario where at least the entire offense in a way was revolving around what Lamar Jackson could do, and depending on the route in which they go with the offensive coordinator, which they still haven't made a decision on just yet, you could be asking Lamar Jackson to go in a completely different direction. And can one say that he's truly ready for a shift of that kind? You wouldn't really be able to tell. We just haven't seen it yet. So that should be pretty interesting. What else do I want to say about that? Yeah, also, I mean, like, he's not completely devoid of weapons on that defensive side. You've got to be able to find a good offensive coordinator, though. And I would think, again, not to play the projection game, but I would believe, honestly, that one guy they'd be looking heavily into would be Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator currently for the Seahawks. The only thing is that, again, if that is the direction in which they go, I think they'd already try to reach out to him, or they've had other people in the fan base of that Ravens organization come out and say that they wanted to take a look at him specifically. And I don't know if I could blame them. You know, the connection with his father is there, as Gary Kubiak was also a coordinator for the Ravens in the early 2010s before moving on to Denver and making a Super Bowl there. So hey, there you go, right? Yeah, that just would be an interesting component to look at there specifically. And then on a quick note, 39.2 million people on average watched the Divisional Round weekend. We're talking about across all of the games involved. In that time span, fans were locking in and making sure they got in their watch of the action. And that's some tremendous stuff, to say the least. You have to respect it. Second most of all time, they mentioned, I think, for just general playoff games before the Super Bowl, of course. Nothing's going to compete with that. But again, that's how the story ends up going. That's how the season progresses. You have to battle week in and week out to, again, outlast another opponent and come out victorious. So with every single playoff game, with the exception of maybe one on Wild Card Weekend, already being pretty damn good, repeating that on the second week made sure that fans all over the place, no matter what's happening, just tune in, give it a shot, see what's going on with the game. And hey, that is definitely what is up. Moving on into some of these next few developments, and I'm not gonna lie, not only are these just dealing with some highly sensitive material, but also through seeing them initially and then reading into them a little bit, which is what made this video, or this follow-up, take just a little bit of time, just to understand what the hell was going on, especially with two of these next few developments here. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Truly, what is happening? Because it is here where we have to take a drastic turn into some highly serious material. To get into it first, we have to deal with news surrounding Jim Irsay, who did pass away last May, as I did go over in a previous off-season recap at that time, right? And when that first was reported, it was definitely a tragic piece of news that ravaged the entire league. You know, as I stated in that video at several points, like, the man did clearly have a lot of different things going on in his life. Some that put him in a negative light, to say the least. However, in spite of all those flaws, this was still a man who provided so much to the city of Indianapolis and tried his best to carry on the legacy that his late father had with the Colts organization previously, as he had taken over ownership of that team in 1997 after his father's passing. He's done pretty much everything you could want in terms of, filling out the team to become a pretty respectable one during his early tenure. And one can question what has happened in the past decade, especially with Andrew Luck leaving and having all these underwhelming seasons and things like that on the field. But nevertheless, they're still fairly respected, I guess, from the outside looking in. Not to mention some of the charities that he had committed to in terms of funds and things like that and donations in his overall life. And his work as a sort of, I'm not going to say full-on spokesperson, but he was an advocate in a way for, work in dealing with some of the very stuff that he was facing. Very outspoken about mental health, very outspoken about addiction. And it was believed that he had been dealing with a wide array of that stuff over the past few years leading up to it. There was a situation where he was arrested for, I believe, a DUI, if I'm not mistaken, within some point of time over the last 5 years. And people definitely tried to run with that just wildly, right? Because that's how reckless people can be sometimes. So again, we're not saying that at that point, he was this perfect person, but this was a trying man, trying to do more good than bad in his overall life. And apparently, initially, it was believed that, as this quote from this AP article states, when Irsay died in May, the team issued a statement saying he died peacefully in his sleep, end quote. And one would believe that, it made sense. He was a bit older around that time, and to that point, and all that commitment, all that energy spent on trying to account for all these different things, even when you look at some of his previous public appearances, prior to that time last year, it did look as though his overall health was on the decline. So to try to chalk it up to natural causes in that moment might have been convenient for some people to at least take as a fact in that situation. However, with some recent reports, not so much. Because as the overall development goes, the FBI is viewing this in a completely different way, and they are opening up an investigation to further look into his death. As this quote from USA Today states, the FBI is investigating the circumstances of late Indianapolis Colts owner Jim Irsay's death and the addiction recovery specialist who treated Irsay in his final days, according to a report from the Washington Post, end quote. And to reference that specific article, it was mentioned here along with the last quote that I mentioned from the AP, that quote, but in late August, the Washington Post reported Irsay continued to battle a long-time addiction to painkillers and that he had overdosed 3 times in the last 5 years preceding his death. And let me just tell you right now, as I've already said, when we've looked at some of the other stuff involving FBI investigations and things of that nature, they are not bringing this case forward for no reason. Sure, this is stuff that might have been piling up and just adding on top of one another for a while now. And that's how the FBI does work with these kinds of things. They are waiting for as much evidence as possible to ensure that they yield a conviction. They are not fucking around. If they find something here, and more than likely they would not be levying this case forward otherwise. I'm telling you that right now. This makes things much darker than people were willing to admit previously. Now, again, the team is well within their right to say what they said at the time. They understood as well with him overseeing it that, hey, these are issues that were going on with him. But in that moment, can you blame them for wanting to try to save their own face? Ensure that, this is a moment of a true celebration of life for Jim Irsay, rather than having people just continue to dig into that past and just have all these skeletons in the closet come out, proverbially speaking, right? Proverbially speaking. Jeez, can't speak. Oh my goodness. But yeah, you want to try to honor him in the best way possible. And if it means, in that scenario, trying to go with, I guess, a PR prepped statement in light of that fact, then so be it from the Colts' perspective. But again, when you just think about that dynamic, because you have, as well as all these articles have mentioned, and as we've already detailed in a previous recap in the offseason as well, you have 3 of his daughters handling the operations for the team currently. And it was a difficult time for them, especially early on, to deal with the loss of their father. Now, again, they themselves are not oblivious to the fact that, again, he was struggling with a few different things in his lifetime. Those 3 are not oblivious to that at all. And I think some of these articles had a few quotes from those guys mentioning their kind of reaction to some of the events that he had gotten himself in over the past few years, prior to them having to take over the organization in his place. Still, though, to tell a parent, even if it wasn't, done intentionally, if that notion about him passing away peacefully in his sleep is proven to be a lie here. Because, as these articles have stated as well, there was no true autopsy. As this quote states right here from USA Today, the Post reported last August, as well in that same article that was mentioned, that the Beverly Hills Police Department, which initially investigated Irsay's death, did not perform a toxicology report or autopsy. End quote. And when you see something like that, you could understand why there would be suspicion here on the FBI's part. Because no autopsy whatsoever, that doesn't offer any clarity to anyone. You can just say that he passed away peacefully in his sleep, but why are you trying so hard to make that be the sticking point, the lasting outcome of this situation? If there wasn't potentially more to the story as the FBI is trying to investigate within this context. That's strange. Think about what that does to the Irsay family. Like, you're going along, and yes, he was dealing with addiction and mental health throughout his life. But you're going along throughout this entire time, even when that report still comes out, with no autopsy in place. You truly don't know what to believe at this point. And you're going around thinking for pretty much the last 9 months, going on a year to this, 8 months, technically. We'll be reaching that point eventually, but essentially damn near 2/3 of the year following that death of Irsay, thinking a number of different things went wrong here. You don't have a genuine answer. And at that point, your mind is going to wander all over the place. You probably have no idea and probably don't want to even understand how crazy that would be for them to go through in that situation. knowing that you lost someone that close to you who raised you in spite of all that, and who was still, again, even with his own individual struggles, a truly upstanding figure amongst all of that, especially with what he's been able to do with that organization. You lose somebody like that, and you don't know why. You don't have any way to understand the circumstances surrounding it, because they don't do their fucking job and truly get a read as to any other circumstances in that moment that might have led to his passing. That's just weird. That's incredibly weird. And when I saw this, because originally I had to follow up on it. Like, there was an Instagram post alleging that this was going down. And so, okay, from that point on, I'm seeing it. I'm thinking it's absolutely crazy. So again, had to take it upon myself to look through this further, try to follow up on this, get a read on what exactly is going on. And as it was mentioned here, there is another individual here who is very much so at play in this entire thing. Now, when it comes to this individual, let me see if I can find a good quote here. Okay. Alright. Quote, on January 22nd, via USA Today, the Post reported that it reviewed a federal grand jury subpoena showing that the FBI requested records and information relating to Irsay's death, his substance use, illegal and prescription drugs, as they have in parentheses, and his relationship with Dr. Harry Haratunian, an addiction recovery specialist based in Southern California. End quote. So again, we've already established that, one, with you not having a true autopsy for this, like, what exactly are you trying to hide here? Why are you not doing your own job here? Like, is there a cover-up potentially that we don't know about? That is exactly what the FBI is trying to look into here. We've already established that, again, he's had well-documented struggles with that kind of substance use and abuse in his life. But to throw out that he'd been dealing with 3 overdoses in the last 5 years, it's like, okay, you look at some of those past few public appearances that he's had in that time span, and if it's true that he was using at that time, along with deteriorating health, there could be a potential correlation there. That, again, does not paint a great picture as to what was once deemed by the team themselves as a peaceful and painless experience of transition for Irsay. Because those kinds of things, no matter what drug you're using in that situation, combined with potential health problems that he'd been facing, generally speaking, due to his older age, could make for a potentially lethal mixture. But now this individual, Dr. Haratunian, an addiction recovery specialist, that is just a little interesting to me. Now, as the USA Today article also goes through, they mention that he himself had essentially been serving as his physician throughout this long-standing battle with addiction, as that Post article also said. But damn crazy to me is that initially, as this quote, before we get into the fact that they didn't have an autopsy here, they mention that a death certificate for Irsay was signed, and Haratunian did it, with that certificate listing the cause of death is cardiac arrest caused by acute pneumonia. End quote. From the USA Today article. Again, that could be a potential condition that is realistic. But wouldn't, in that scenario, their certificate match up with a genuine autopsy conducted by the police department in that specific division in that situation. And seeing as he passed away in the Beverly Hills Hotel, which is why that police department, with it being within their jurisdiction, would need to conduct a further investigation into it at the time in the first place, just making it even crazier. Why would you have the doctor in this situation be one of the main people to sign that specific certificate? These are just a lot of questions that could be rolling through as this investigation goes forth, and that's why they want to have access to all of that information. That's why they've come out and requested it. Let me see. And it's not just the FBI doing it, as this ABC News article also smartly points out. The DEA, yes, that DEA, is also investigating the same death. So, again, if something is found out to be true about this, if anything about this sticks, this is going to be a massive problem. And this is not a comparison at all, but bruh, even without me covering the MLB a ton, I was there when the breaking news came out that Tyler Skaggs, the former pitcher for the Angels, had gone through a similar situation where he had somebody in his circle, that damn coward, feeding him all of these different supplements and lethal drugs that led to his death. And it was found that this person was liable by providing all that stuff to him. And you have people to this day still coming out saying the craziest shit about Skaggs at this point. Well, that case recently just got settled, if I'm not mistaken. And again, they found that person responsible. I can confirm that right now by searching up said case. And as we see here, yes, just last year, towards the end of December, they reached a wrongful death settlement in this case. So, as it says here, quote, jury foreman Richard Chung said after the settlement was announced that the panel had agreed to award Skaggs' family roughly $100 million when they were told to cease deliberations, $60 to $80 million for economic damages, $5 million to $15 million for emotional distress damages, and $10 to $20 million for punitive damages, end quote. That kind of money, again, is not going to give them back their son, but it is something. And I mean, it's like, geez, bro. It just, man. Plus, again, the person that did it, as this quote says in this Los Angeles Times article that I just put up later on, the pill was given to Skaggs by Angels Communications Director Eric Kay, who was serving 22 years in federal prison for his role in the pitcher's death. Skaggs was discovered in a South Lake, Texas hotel room the next morning, and an autopsy concluded he accidentally died of asphyxia after aspirating his own vomit. End quote. Yes, that is pretty damn graphic. But again, even with that being taken into account, even with them finding a fellow Angels member responsible for it, you still have people coming after his family and coming after him as a person. And like, I can't even tell you the amount of different times I've seen people just call this man Tyler Skaggs a junkie, knowing that Kay was responsible for giving him a pill that was laced with fentanyl. So this shit gets serious. If there is something similar in this Irsay case, you have a person, if they are found responsible for it, looking at the same severity in terms of a sentence. Like, this is not something that they play around with, genuinely speaking. And again, it's not, there are parallels. We're obviously understanding that Irsay is much older at this point. And again, he's definitely had his fair share of struggles as well. I don't bring up Skaggs in that situation to hold any kind of disrespectful sentiment or try to compare like it's a competition or something. That's not my intent with doing that. But again, if you have that going on there, and you have something similar with a person potentially feeding Irsay lethal substances to supposedly treat these problems like a placebo effect. Supposedly they work, and yet with the overuse of them combined with what they contain, they in fact make these conditions far worse than they were intended to be. That could be a huge problem. That's all I'm saying there. As this quote from the USA Today states, I can just read the entire thing. The Post reported that Haratinian was giving Irsay opioid prescriptions and ketamine injections in his final months after his relapse. The volume of Haratinian's prescriptions, as many as 200 opioid pills shortly before Irsay's 2 overdoses in 2023, per the Post, and ketamine treatments alarmed those close to Irsay, the Post reported. Ketamine is a drug approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration for use as an anesthetic, but its use to treat patients with substance abuse problems is controversial, per the Post, for the drug's own potential for abuse. According to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, ketamine produces hallucinations and can cause rises in heart rate and blood pressure. End quote. So just think about that for a second. Prescriptions, by giving them out, it's one thing to give them out. You can say that. So to just take that quote on its surface and understand that that was being given to him, that could, be taken a number of different ways. It doesn't suggest how much initially with that specific statement he was being given. But you are telling me that 200 opioid pills before 2 overdoses in 2023, and that doesn't even take into account how much ketamine is being essentially injected into your system at that point. Because for those who don't know, ketamine is essentially horse tranquilizer. It is essentially horse tranquilizer at that point. And again, in some cases, you have people over-abuse it for an extreme adrenaline rush. The overuse of that, again, will lead into situations, as they state right here, that will speed up pretty much everything you're doing. Your heart's going to beat faster, and your blood pressure is going to skyrocket. You can understand why it'd be controversial in that situation. Because, again, once you are in a situation where you are addicted to something, even if this is already an unsafe drug, and you even have people coming out and saying this despite the FDA approving it, that should tell you everything you need to know about this. Is like, yeah, people may need that adrenaline boost at times. But again, if you do happen to use this, you probably have to use such a marginal amount at any one point of time. And you would still be in a spot where, again, your heart rate is going to shoot up drastically. And you would be on the verge of dangerous territory when it comes to, the scale of a person's heart rate and what exactly is an optimal heart rate compared to just completely abnormal on either extreme. So these are the kinds of drugs that Irsay was being given at this point. And that's despite the man, again, as they state right here, they had a charity launched in 2020 called Kicking the Stigma, according to USA Today as well, which was essentially doing some of the same things that I was talking about earlier on when it came to him, again, being an advocate for mental health, mental illness, and things of that nature. So it's just, man, it's like overall, it is just genuinely a weird situation, and it gets even worse. Especially if this stuff is true, because, man, like, this is not even the first time in the past few years where ketamine has been at the center of something truly tragic when it comes to a public figure in the sense, right? People naturally struggle with it all the time. So it's not to, again, be made out as a sort of competition. But for context, as ABC News today, as ABC News stated in their article, and that would even be a follow-up to what they had when this specific incident that I'm about to say initially came out themselves. Because they were one of the first news companies to come out and report this themselves. But, quote, the use of ketamine to treat addiction was the subject of an investigation into the 2023 death of former actor Matthew Perry. 5 people ended up facing criminal charges in the Perry case, with one doctor being sentenced to 30 months in federal prison for distributing ketamine to the actor. End quote. So again, that is an ugly precedent to have. An ugly one. Same thing, where it was believed that Matthew Perry himself had passed away from natural causes. And then that comes out. And everybody loses their shit. For a man who had been, again, as an actor, not a person who necessarily watched all those shows myself, but again, one of the more commonly recognized actors in that particular industry. And the connections were all over the place. Like, these people were getting outraged. And those closest to him, again, thinking that he had peacefully parted ways. Then they get hit with this bombshell? And you can understand just how much that would truly fuck somebody up in that situation. So you really hope that this isn't the case for Irsay. But man, like, this is just, it just makes you say, like, truly, what the fuck is going on here? And then as this quote from the AP states as well, Irsay's 3 daughters, who now run the Colts, issued a statement saying their father never claimed to be perfect and acknowledging he used his voice to reduce the stigma of addiction and mental health issues to advocate for those who fought similar battles, as I had alluded to earlier. It's not like they were oblivious, and they never did say that. But again, he was trying. He was trying to walk the right path. And at the very least, even if he was getting himself into those situations where he might have been still using, he wanted to do everything he could to make sure that few others, for what is a common problem everywhere, few others had to go through what he went through as a person dealing with his own mental health battles and his own troubles with addiction. He didn't want that for anybody else. It's just, man, it's truly unfortunate. Now, this is just the starting process of it, so I'm sure that there are going to be more follow-ups on this. And man, again, you don't hope for the worst, but my goodness, Like the fact that the drug has already been linked to, some other major deaths in the lives of a few public figures over the past few years. The fact that the Post had to, come out with their own follow-up on this information, and the fact that this evidence apparently has done enough, has accumulated over time enough to where the FBI is now getting involved, to where the DEA is now getting involved with this. This does not look good for any party involved in this. And we've already alluded to the fact that Skaggs' family reached a settlement. We alluded to the fact that that motherfucker was sentenced to 22 years over giving him a pill laced with fentanyl. We went over the fact that you had multiple people indicted in that incident with Matthew Perry's death, relating to him receiving ketamine from these different sources. The foundation is laid already. The precedents are there. If they find enough, if they get even the slightest hint of anything of the sort from the information they pick up on, like Haratunian is more than likely going to find himself in the same situation. I'm sure that he is probably, again, not trying to get himself involved publicly. That's why he wouldn't respond to any of these requests for comment. But again, he can play this the easy way or the hard way. Like, you can shake off these news companies and different websites like that. You can shake them off and you can avoid talking to these reporters as much as you want. Either the FBI, again, they're being nice with you. They're requesting the information at first. You can have it go that way, or they can just... They would probably need some kind of documentation to do it. But you would much rather have them, again, just ask you via request than blitz your ass, walk into your office, storm it, and pretty much seize everything immediately, while holding you for a good amount of time as well, potentially for interrogation. That's just not something you want to deal with. So his ass, again, it might be tough for him, especially if he is not found to be involved in this somehow. But if he was, even if he may not want to face backlash, it'd be much easier for you to play ball. Like, you just don't do it. They're not posing this as a case for no reason. I promise you right now. They're not. And to briefly pivot, just briefly to mention that the Dolphins, as crazy as that might seem, the Dolphins hired Chris Tabor as special teams coordinator. But to get right back into the fuckery, man. Even worse news would break out here, because you would have a weirder, in a way, situation involving a former defensive lineman in the NFL and Kevin Johnson. When I first saw this as well, also via an Instagram post, so again, trying to check for legitimacy, making sure I read through a few things and see what exactly is going on with that. Well, this also does not paint a positive picture either. This is just what is going on? Because as the AP article states, quote, former Philadelphia Eagles defensive lineman Kevin Johnson died from blunt head trauma and stab wounds at a homeless encampment, according to the medical examiner. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner said Johnson, 55, was pronounced dead Wednesday morning after being found unconscious. His death was ruled a homicide and is being investigated. End quote. What the fuck? Like, what exactly, how, just, there are too many questions to even think about in a situation like that. Now, in terms of him being at a homeless encampment, well, this quote says that investigators believe Johnson had been living at the encampment at the time of his death. Friends said Johnson had health issues later in life that contributed to his situation. End quote. And it's like, man, it's just, it goes to show you that, honestly, from that standpoint, specifically involving that, nothing is guaranteed. Not even if you do get a chance at playing in the NFL. Like, I'd read through something else, or was watching a pair of videos that could be somewhat relevant for a situation like this. There was a separate one, and I was listening to it, and the person essentially said, like, hey, back, in the previous era, I think both of these were from Flammo Raps, ironically enough. I gotta try to find both of them. But I know in one, particularly speaking, or granted, no, it was probably the same one. So you had him bring up at different points in these videos that, one, on the one hand, back in the earliest days of the NFL, right? Yeah, back in the earliest days of the NFL, essentially, it was not seen as a, I guess, just ticket out of your specific situation. And you definitely saw that, with the early iteration of the league, with the early iteration of a few teams. Like, these people were still taking on other menial jobs. Despite playing the sport, despite being some of the best early athletes in the sport, they were still, working the common jobs in those sorts of things. So it was not a guarantee that they were just going to be completely fine financially. And then there would be a shift over the years to where eventually, as you got into the 1970s onward, even with the strikes and everything, an NFL career could truly change your life for the better. Financially, especially for the best athletes in the sport, but in a number of different realms as well. So you saw a boost in overall popularity of the sport correlating with that kind of notion. To see that finished product come to life with the recent advent of TV and then color TV at that time. Not to mention, as well, you see yourself, in a way, at that time, as a sort of resonating presence with some of these players being marketed at the top of the NFL at the time as well. And that just made it kind of like a machine at that point. Like, hey, you have younger, more impressionable people watching at the time and thinking to themselves that, hey, if I can reach that kind of point, like this specific athlete, I can do, my own kind of practice behind the scenes, my own kind of training, potential nutrition at the time, even though it probably, it's always been something that people have taken seriously, but you could argue that it's recently ramped up in terms of how people diet and things like that, and how outspoken they are about it over at least the past 3 decades. Nevertheless, by doing all those things the right way, I can reach that point as an NFL player too, and start to make a good amount of money as well. However, as that has happened, and as, inflation has continued to take place, as more money has come through, as these contracts have been worth greater, you still hear a number of stories about people struggling to get by. Whether it be because they spend all that money up quickly, whether it be because of injuries derailing their careers and them not having enough resources around them to truly live in a functional way after that particular incident, and a number of other things of the sort. And I think that video was well done too. I gotta make sure I find it, and when I do, I'll link it as a card. I'll link it in the card, I should say, on this particular video. But it was well done. It went through a pair, at least a few good stories of those kinds of situations where players were just truly reaching rock bottom after entering or exiting the league as a result of injuries. And how I think you had a couple, again, face potentially debilitating injuries that harmed their lives, while another was looking for a pension that essentially is not guaranteed, simply because of the fact that, as that video stated, essentially, as the NFL at that time, when it comes to, doling out that kind of money, you are put through a vetting process as a player to see whether or not you are eligible for it. And essentially, you are paid more money if you are a doctor, or at least the more money that you are paid as a doctor, and you are serving on a case, you are somewhat incentivized to fail them. Like, there was an eligibility score of 25 that people needed to get in order to qualify for said pension. And they intentionally slid a particular player all the way down below what it was, because he was over by like 2, so he qualified. And then they changed around a few numbers here and a few numbers there because of this, and bam, he didn't qualify anymore. And it sent him into a spiral where he was contemplating self-harm as well. But all three of those players, thankfully, as detailed towards the end of that video, they've been able to make a much better life for themselves, honestly. One was able, I think the same person that was contemplating self-harm at a point, he was found by homeless people who he had recently given a jersey to, or signed a jersey for. I think he gave him a coat. What am I talking about, right? But he was eventually able to, find solace in his own community and take in that environment with his own people to get back on the right track. Then you had a pair who were just connected with each other, dealing with similar things, being able to, connect with each other in that time and ultimately work themselves back into normal operations in their livelihood. Now, that's a pretty long tangent. And again, felt like a good time to just reference that point. Again, recently watching that, seeing that go down and be talked about in, I guess, a more broader way. And then you have information come out about something like this. Now, again, I can't speculate. I cannot speculate as to how Kevin Johnson got himself into a homeless encampment. Even with me throwing it out there, that again, you have a lot of different factors that can contribute to it. The reality is that we don't know. All we can do at that point is really listen to what those potential close friends of his are saying in that. Hey, there were troubles that he was dealing with when it came to health that contributed to that situation going down. Because we have no idea right now. But to just hear about that is just, insane to me. So, as this quote from a Los Angeles-based ABC news station states, getting into the incident itself, Johnson was found in the 1300 block of East 120th Street after deputies responded just before 8 a.m. to report of an unconscious man. Sheriff's officials said he was pronounced dead at the scene. Johnson's cause of death was listed as blunt head trauma and stab wounds, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide according to LA County Medical Examiner records. Investigators believe the former football player had been living at the encampment. They're asking for help from any witnesses who might have seen what happened. End quote. Again, I don't know. Again, I can't speculate on whether or not there were witnesses. If there were, yes, you would hope that somebody does in that situation, step up and just relay information. Because, honestly, no matter how you frame it, you can look at this any way you want to. It's like, bro, are we being serious right now? Are we actually being serious right now? Like, say what you want about him being in a homeless encampment and everything like that, but, this man is still a full-on human being and deserves to be treated with at least some form of common decency. Now, again, they don't know who was involved, and it'd be interesting to see if they do find this particular person responsible. But, just literally, it is literally preying on the meek, okay? Which is something that you just, don't do. You just don't do it. You don't. Somebody, and again, we don't know until, they follow this up, they find this person, but somebody makes an executive decision waking up in the morning to just, you know what, I'm going to do that to a person, a homeless person. Like, why? Just why? And again, until they come out with more information as a part of this investigation, we genuinely don't know. It's just, it's crushing. It's like, why? Seriously. I don't know. I don't know. It is insane. Like, it's wild, bro. Like, dude. Man. Like, you could, again, even if they, understood that he might have been there for a reason, brother still has family. And I couldn't even imagine how they are still trying to take this all in. And they are going to be looking for clarity as to who's responsible. But even they, after just getting off of the Irsay situation, even they went through a proper autopsy to at least get an understanding of the how this potentially happened. But the why and the who, man, bro, y'all better figure this shit out. I'll tell you that right now. Y'all better, because there's just no way, dude. There's no fucking way. Honestly. And again, until we figure that out, who's to say? Who's to say at this point? There has to be some kind of answer somewhere. For another piece of news, John Brodie, a former 49ers quarterback, would pass away at the age of 90. And at first, I was kind of questioning what I was reading. Because early on, they mentioned in this AP article, that one, he had a 17-year career with the 49ers at this point. And I think, honestly enough, I think that when I was watching, I think that was the specific quarterback they were talking about when it came to the one who, I guess, before Drake May had a chance to, was as young as 23 and leading the NFL in completion percentage. Which, if that is true, neither one of these articles mentioned. And if this is the quarterback that did it, John Brodie, well, that just adds to his legend. So you deserve a massive amount of respect there for contributing on the field. And, overall, these articles kind of explain what he was involved in. Because not only did he play for 17 years for the organization, but they also mention that, quote, he was also a standout golfer and later played on what is now the PGA Tour Champions and won the 1991 Security Pacific Senior Classic. Brodie was also a broadcaster, serving as a football and golf analyst for NBC, and he called the Super Bowl in January 1979. So that man did a whole hell of a lot as a general athlete and as a person exposed to the sport of football generally. They mention that, he holds the franchise record for seasons with the 49ers. He's second behind Joe Montana on passing yards with 31,548. And at the time of his retirement, he was third in passing in a career in NFL history in terms of yardage behind Unitas and Tarkenton. So, he was doing it all. And again, that deserves a massive amount of respect. But what jumped out to me immediately is that, quote, this is going to sound weird, but from that same AP article, they say, the 49ers said Brodie's family said he died Friday. Brodie had a stroke on October 24th, 2000, end quote. Now, upon reading that initially, I'm like, okay, what does one have to do with the other? Why are we talking about a passing here and then bringing up in the next sentence to juxtapose that death that he had a stroke 25 years ago? That seems just so weird when reading that on the first time. But that is actually true, as I would see in the other article. I guess the Bay Area-based NBC channel here, program, coming out with one as well, saying that, quote, his life changed on October 23rd, 2000. In that Brodie suffered a stroke while watching the memorable Jets-Dolphins game on Monday Night Football. It was a remarkable feat that he survived and lived another century. First of all, he shouldn't have survived, as wife Sue said in the 2005 book, San Francisco 49ers, Where Have You Gone? It was a massive, massive stroke. A lot of people who have strokes can't even walk because they don't have the natural gifts that he has. End quote. And I'm like, wow. That is truly something that is remarkable. Just another display of, how crazy it is, sometimes when it comes to, how the human body can work and everything like that. Like, you have to understand that at that point, that man is 65, going through a stroke, and you can imagine, again, I wouldn't have the numbers on it. I'm no medical expert. There was probably a very low chance of him to survive in that situation. But instead, he lived for another 25 or so years after that. And I'm sure he was still doing what he'd always been doing and supporting his team and supporting his family. Like, that does deserve a tremendous amount of credit. Truly. It's interesting to have that point emphasized, that this happened during that specific Monday Night Football game. And honestly, no bullshit, that could be something that does induce a massive response of that kind in a person's body. Like the way in which that went. You're going through that entire game thinking that, the Dolphins at that point, they more than had it in the bag. And then the Jets at this particular time, they somehow find a way to pull that off in the fourth quarter. And you have people starting to bite their nails and everything like that. Like, that is just, wow. That is truly crazy, to be honest with you. I mean, jeez, bro. That is insane. Wow. Wow. That is crazy, man. I mean, wow. Okay. But yeah, generally speaking, again, clearly, with what some of these other people have been saying, I should say. Jay York had a statement about it. One of his former teammates had a statement about him as a person. Like, it's very clear that he meant so much to that organization and so much to that community. So, I mean, it is unfortunate to see something like that go down last week. And, you hope that those guys, anybody who knew him, anybody who was close to him, and, those, around him when it comes to family, when it comes to relatives, when it comes to potential friends, they're probably still in a mode of grief, but there was more than enough to celebrate from the man himself when it came to his overall life. Again, to live for that long already and be involved in that much, then deal with a potentially life-threatening stroke and still live for 25 more years. That is truly special. So, man, that is just, that is truly something special. I can't really add any more there. Okay. Alright. In the meantime, to transition from that, after, again, just a wild sequence of events, especially with the Jim Irsay thing, especially with the Kevin Johnson thing. Chances are I'm probably going to talk about it. I've been contemplating grabbing some stuff out. I am more than likely going to do that for the Skag stuff and tying it in with the Irsay situation. Because it's like, bruh, like, I seriously, y'all niggas that keep on talking about Skags like that, y'all are so fucking dirty and slimy for that shit. Like, it's crazy. Still seeing that shit go down to this point. Like, y'all gotta have, again, even if, they might be, that kind of maligned individual as they're living. Like, bro, y'all gotta have some fucking respect at some point. Like, where the hell do y'all draw the fucking line? Like, come on. This shit's crazy. But I digress. We have a fair amount of lighter news, and they mostly deal with, more tame subjects. Harold Landry III, for instance, would be out of the game against the Broncos with a knee injury. Now, they didn't necessarily need him in that game. They generated a good enough amount of pressure without him between the likes of Chason, Ponder, and Durden, Ellis, you name it. They made Stidham feel them on every single drive at that point. So they were more than fine there. It would be interesting to see if they can get him back for the Super Bowl. It would definitely help them on their front four. And I mean, you have a couple weeks in between now and then. So there's a chance that he can get healthy for that game. Then the Steelers would do something incredibly interesting. And they would hire Mike McCarthy as their head coach. Now again, because I don't even need to look up anything there has been so much said about this already, and it goes without saying. But I can just rattle this off from my own perspective. Because I truly don't know what the hell the game plan was here. You are in a situation where you're coming off of a season where you were essentially a championship or bust type of squad. Investing in that defense with the most expensive one in the NFL, with a lot of veterans on that side of the football. And you brought in Aaron Rodgers to try to accomplish the same thing for a potential last-ditch effort in what could be one of his final seasons in the NFL. And you fell that short. Your first playoff game, you, yet again, got boat raced in a playoff game. Did not even come close to winning by the tail end of it. And for yet another season, you had Tomlin reach the playoffs with a fairly mediocre record just to be a first-round exit in the wild card. It marks at that time, he was tied with Marvin Lewis for consecutive playoff losses with 7. So again, when he stepped down, with it being on his own volition, again, I stated then, and I still stand on the fact that he deserved that. He earned the right to take things into his own hands and make that decision himself. But it did leave the Steelers in a bit of a scramble. They'd mentioned at several points that, players were kind of treating this and the news of hearing him step down as he relayed to them directly in a team meeting. You had players, per multiple reports and with some of the things that I was watching as well, come out and say that it felt like a funeral in that room. That's how devastating this was. So if you're the Steelers, naturally, you're going to want to find an answer, and you're going to want to find an answer fast. But I just don't know what made them think McCarthy was it. McCarthy's the same kind of coach. And it's not to be disrespectful to either one of them, because Tomlin is probably a greater coach. McCarthy's a damn good coach. But this is the same man who was infamous for going 12-5, 12-5, and 12-5 with the Cowboys, just to have wild card exit after wild card exit after wild card exit. And again, one of those being with, again, the lasting image of Ezekiel Elliott's tenure in Dallas. Literally being a fucking center with a direct snap with no other lineman flanking him whatsoever. Him being the lone man in the middle, snapping the ball to Dak Prescott as he got demolished by Azeez Al-Shire to end off the damn game. That's, yes, McCarthy can be an innovative mind, but you see that play. You see that play. And keep in mind that McCarthy is also taken off a year from coaching, generally speaking, because of how things got in Dallas. Fair enough. But with one of his lasting images as a true competitor in the playoffs being that, not to mention him getting his ass kicked by Jordan Love in Green Bay in that game. The 48-32 result was not the true score in that game. It was much worse than that. They got their ass kicked. That's the coach you want to deal with in Pittsburgh. Another coach who can, again, help you coast through a season without really being taken seriously as a championship contender. You do enough to barely qualify for a playoff seed, and then you go out in some of the worst ways possible in the wild card or in the first round that you appear in. You're not truly moving forward in this way. You just aren't. You're stuck in the same exact place. Like, what the hell do you think McCarthy, at the age of 62, is going to do much better for you than what Mike Tomlin was doing at a younger age? And again, that's taking away the fact that with them having only 3 coaches in franchise history, all of them before this were initially hired before they even reached their late 30s. And Mike McCarthy, 62, as other people like to mention. But that's not the point that I'm necessarily harping on. Mike McCarthy has shown you nothing to suggest that he can play above that, even. You're just getting the same thing again. And it's like, at what point are you going to understand that as constructed, you don't have the roster to pull that off? You can't afford trying to play things the same way they've always been in Pittsburgh right now. This roster is completely different. The culture of this team has completely shifted from what it once was. And that needs a full-scale reset. Not just a move like this to temporarily say, hey, you know what, we can still assert ourselves as a powerhouse in this league, so let's get the man who is from Pittsburgh. I don't give a fuck if he's from Pittsburgh. I don't care. I do not care. That could invoke some inspiration a little bit, I would think, right? McCarthy was definitely old enough to remember the glory days that the team had. That doesn't mean that he has the capability as a head coach to replicate that shit. It just doesn't. Like, these are probably coaches that he looked up to, and you can't hold that against him. But, again, not even just from the age standpoint, from what he's consistently done on the football field. Even though he could be seen as a guy who can develop quarterbacks, as other people have said at this point, he is no Chuck Noll. He is no Bill Cowher. And again, Mike Tomlin, even with doing the similar stuff, one could say he has a better overall resume. So, in all honesty, you may even be taking a step back. With, again, a lot of the guys as well, with them being established veterans, with them being in their mid to late 30s in a way, you have so much that you need to figure out here. Because it's not like Cam Hayward can be with that franchise forever. And he's like 36. Aaron Rodgers is obviously not too far away from retiring. I don't know if he will, and I can't assume that he will in this offseason. And then you get into the understanding that people believe that this move could single-handedly bring Aaron Rodgers back to this team. Why would you want that? Considering, and yes, even with them, being in somewhat good, I guess, good standing with each other. After their time with each other in Green Bay, there was a reason why this man, towards the tail end of his time there, decided, hey, as the quarterback, with me being Aaron Rodgers, fuck your play calls. Nigga, I'm going to call my own shot. I'm going to call my own plays. Fuck you. That's exactly what Aaron Rodgers was doing. adjusting plays at the line simply because he did not trust what the fuck Mike McCarthy was calling. You think that's going to change all of a sudden with them being on the same sideline again? Yeah, good luck with that. That's not how this is going to work. So, from that standpoint, it's like, seriously, I don't know why they think this is going to be a good move for them. I don't. And with another video that I was watching, a clip of a segment from First Take, I do think that Ryan Clark made a good point about this. Essentially, in that segment, with him being a Steelers player, he's going to be asked about it. He said something that did make some sense in response to Dan Orlovsky, I believe, and he said that he did not think that it was about them being accepting of mediocrity, as Dan Orlovsky had originally said. Ryan Clark himself felt that it was more about them being unaccepting of a rebuild. And I'm like, damn. That's a great point. That's essentially what I just said, but that specific quote hits it right on the nail. The Steelers have been nothing but a model of excellence throughout pretty much their entire franchise history. And from their standpoint, even with Rooney II now, having taken over for his father in 2017 and making his first move of this kind as an owner of the organization, you want to refer back to that time. Back when Rooney I, Rooney Sr. maybe, was making these decisions. And understand that you do have a rich history that rarely, if ever, goes through any kind of tumultuous time like that relating to a rebuild or relating to a long string of losing seasons. And even in that, you always find a way to reach the mountaintop once again. That is how the Steelers have amassed so many championships, so many accolades as an organization. No matter where you go at around the world, their franchise is going to be recognizable. That's what they've done for themselves in their first, I believe, because they were established when? Just make sure I got this right. Okay. Yeah. Let me see. Okay, established in 1933. Yeah. So again, no matter where they go at, as they near 100 years of their existence, truly have established themselves as one of the faces in terms of any franchise in the NFL. Point blank, period. So, to have a scenario where you lose that guy in Mike Tomlin, the man there in that city, for 19 seasons without losing a single time, to even entertain the idea of potentially facing that for the first time in quite some time, can be something that invoked a lot of worry across that entire organization. And rather than do that, they choose to just settle. They choose to believe that they can still make something out of this. They choose to instill their faith in a hometown man who has, again, seen it all, has an idea of what the city is looking for in a way, and will definitely be motivated, if nothing else, to do everything in his power to restore this team to its former glory. You can question his ability to actually do it, but he will certainly be motivated to. You can't deny that at all. with the way that he represents the city, from what other people have said, he's definitely going to give it his best shot. But it's like, even with that going down, and even with you being scared, potentially, about having to rebuild, sometimes it is about taking that risk. And again, as I've already said, the roster there is just not good enough. It's not. So to keep on trying to patch this thing briefly, over and over and over and over again, you are never going to be able, in a way, to effectively reestablish yourself as a team to be taken seriously until you fall, in a way. It is very difficult in these kinds of situations to always maintain the steady course and be at the peak of your powers in the NFL. Even the best teams will go through years that they were not anticipating at all. And how they respond does matter a lot. It truly does. Plus, if that is their mindset, if they are so scared of avoiding a full-scale rebuild, I don't know how they can truly say that with conviction, with a straight face, and to also clip down at it as well, right, when talking about this specifically. How can you sit there and not be willing to embrace the rebuild, embrace a chance, an opportunity to reinvigorate that fan base over time? Yes, the early portion of a potential rebuild could be a bore. You know, they've been accustomed to all this success for so much time, to the point where, again, merely settling for playoff appearance after playoff appearance isn't going to get it done. Sometimes you have to be able to hit rock bottom in the league, and rock bottom for them would be consistently not contending, in a way, because that's how good the Steelers have been for that much time. But again, like, sometimes that is the goal. That is what it takes to progress forward ultimately, if you use your resources accordingly. If you draft well, and they need to draft a quarterback, maybe they give Will Howard a chance to have him work under Mike McCarthy, and Mike McCarthy did say apparently that he was interested in working with him. But you need to draft a quarterback. You need to get the right personnel on that team. You need to be able to manage your money well. And it does start as well with a voice in that locker room that fans, that players can truly rally around. As they settle in to a tenure with him, that isn't going to be Mike McCarthy. And again, as constructed, you don't have a roster that can do that at this point. You've already seen you've seen all their deficiencies. They're at the very least okay. And to settle for that is just ridiculous. You have to take a direction. You aren't good enough to compete, clearly. You aren't bad enough at the moment to really get the high draft capital that you'd be looking for. So take the direction, move into a scenario where you are bad enough to start stockpiling assets that way and use them properly to rebuild. As I've said already, you cannot, if you are the Steelers and you are Rooney II, you cannot say that with conviction and with a straight face in any sense of the imagination when you just saw what the Patriots just pulled off and potentially have a chance to still do if they come out on the winning side in Super Bowl 60. Because, by all accounts, they had the greatest coach of all time in Bill Belichick. They had him for all this time. And their 2-decade run as a dynasty was truly great. It truly was. Yet still, with seeing the way things ended in that game against Tennessee in 2019, with understanding that Tom Brady was getting up there in age, with understanding that, to an extent, the mystere and mystique around that dynasty, what had made them so great as an organization, was no longer truly reliable anymore and no longer existent. They completely shifted their focus. Tom Brady out in 2020, going to the Bucs. And then they had to draft Mac Jones. They've went through some of the worst seasons in their franchise history up to that point. And just, they also, again, Bill Belichick was still there at this time. He's also dealing with this. He's had his own struggles as well, with him still having control of both the general manager and head coach positions. And they managed to get even worse in that time. They were not competitive at all, constantly on the losing end, and constantly finishing as a bottom, 8 team, if you could say, in the NFL. A far cry from what the hell Patriots fans had been experiencing 20 years earlier. Yes, you could argue that fans at that point may be a little spoiled. But it took Kraft and I guess other voices in that organization, even with them having that kind of status as a truly great franchise in NFL history when it comes to that 2-decade span, they still had the wherewithal to understand that this could not last forever. And they needed to find a way to reset for the future, which they effectively did. And it was tough. It was painful for them to go through. It got even worse when they gave Gerard Mayo his lone chance as a head coach last season, with them finishing 3-14. But still, they had the capital at the time to go out and get their guy. Try again. Throw another dart at the board and select Drake May in the first round. Then build a roster around him over time. Have that spending spree in the offseason to acquire a shit ton of free agents. And not just scrubs, quality free agents at a number of different positions to fill this team out the right way. And now they're in the Super Bowl. So they just showed you how to pull it off with a team being a great organization from a historical sense, and still recognizing that maybe the roster you currently have is not enough to either contend for a Super Bowl or get a high enough draft pick. And they went through the years of having their fans turn on them completely. They did. But like they said, within no time, it took 5 years. Essentially, it took 5 years. But they're back. And also, it's not something that they have been through it before. They had a brief stretch of time where they were consistently terrible as a team before Bill Cowher got there and turned them back around. So what do you mean you can't afford to do that right now? The precedent is there for you in your history, and you've actively just seen the Patriots get all the way to the Super Bowl after going through a 5-year stretch of doing the exact same thing that you are trying to avoid. It paid off for them. If you actually are willing to give it a chance, it may pay off for you too. Instead, you try to tell yourself before you lay yourself down to sleep at night that you have a team that can contend for a Super Bowl. And instead, every single Steelers fan is laughing in your fucking face. And just hoping and praying that they get something different because they recognize in reality they're probably not going to. And that's the worst possible thing that you could do for them in this situation. The fans are getting sick and tired of it. What have you done for me lately, League? They definitely understand what Mike Tomlin meant to that organization, but they also understood that their last Super Bowl win came that long ago. They are very discontent with where their organization is at right now. And you have a number of people voicing their own opinion saying that, again, they should just embrace a full-scale rebuild. Stop giving us false hope and just hit the reset button already. Not to mention as well, you've had other people just go after their asses for completely missing out on some good talent. Again, it's not an easy pair of shoes to fill when we're talking about a Mike Tomlin replacement here. And I guess there was something as well when I was watching a particular video on it. You have them making the excuse that a younger coach may not be able to handle that kind of pressure. So you bring in an older Mike McCarthy to take it over and lay a little bit of a foundation before bringing in a younger guy. And it's like, no. That's not how it works. Because, yeah, you don't have a true head coach out there or a true candidate out there that's going to be like, damn, this guy is absolutely going to be a great head coach. Maybe that's not the case. But all the names that people have thrown out there between Chris Shula, between Mike LaFleur, between Nathan Shellhaz, people keep on, like, Shellhaz is not a difficult name to say, by the way. I don't know how people keep struggling with that, but I digress. Names like that. All over the place. Like, even if they aren't guarantees, you've seen in recent years how teams can pull it off with the youth. Hell, going back to the Patriots, Vrabel got his young start in Tennessee, and you saw what he did with them before rejuvenating himself and getting back on the right track before rejoining with the Patriots this season. Like, it's there for you on the table, man. You just have to be willing to take that shot. You can't play this scared. You can't. Like, the uncertainty that you may have in this specific situation is honestly a good thing. And you have to lean into that. Because to just constantly go and say, oh, okay, I'm going to put my faith in Mike McCarthy. Are you fucking crazy? Are you crazy? Like, come on, what are we doing, man? That just doesn't make any sense to me. It truly doesn't. All right. the Dolphins would hire Bobby Slowik, former Texans offensive coordinator, as their new offensive coordinator. And again, with the way that it ended in Houston with him, I don't know how the Dolphins would get any better offensively with him in the building. I don't see that at the moment. Now, again, you have to, at some point, settle. You can't really have it your way the entire time. If that's the executive decision that they're making, then okay. I just, with how it is, with how his offense, like, again, I guess he did have a much hotter start in Houston. And, if Tua Tagovailoa is still there, maybe there is something that he can take away from it in terms of general improvement to continue working on his game as a quarterback and elevate himself potentially into becoming a more respected player at that position over the next couple of years, again, depending on if he stays. And, it would be interesting to see as well how he can work with getting Jalen Waddle more involved. With him being the primary target, and again, I don't even know what the situation looks like for Tyreek Hill when he comes back. But I'd imagine that you'd want to have one or two of those guys moving all over the field to try to create mismatches, especially with their speed. More so Jalen Waddle right now. You definitely want to take advantage of that whenever you see fit. Again, I just don't know how it's going to look right now. And I can't really say whether or not this is a good move. It is something that I definitely have to, take more time to actually watch unfold before really coming up with anything there. But as for the Packers, this one makes the most sense to me. They would hire Jonathan Gannon as a defensive coordinator. Again, say what you want about Gannon as a head coach, but clearly with what he was doing in Philadelphia as a defensive coordinator, it's how he got himself into that market in the first place that season. That offseason, technically speaking. I have no doubt that the Packers are going to be just fine on that end. He's proven it. He's gone out and shown you already. And keep in mind, that Eagles team, at the time, they didn't even have nearly the same caliber of players that they currently do. Not even remotely close. Like, granted, you had Brandon Graham in this, you had Fletcher Cox even, to this point. But then on their back end, you had James Bradbury IV, one of their guys to stand out. Jerry Slade Jr. as well, flanking him. So at that point, you're working with way older guys and managing to make them mesh that well together to have that kind of defense. And granted, unluckily for them, they met a very well-run offense in the Kansas City Chiefs in that particular Super Bowl. But it was a full-on shootout in that game. So that was what it was. And he promptly got the Cardinals' job in that offseason as the Eagles lost both their coordinators. That's how it's went for Gannon to this point. So you are now working with the Packers defense that has a younger core and has, obviously, Micah Parsons on that front line along with Rashawn Gary. Not to mention Quay Walker. Not to mention Javon Ballard. Gannon is going to have some fun with that. Trying to move all those players around and putting them in just such great positions to succeed in whatever defense he chooses to run. That's going to be nice to watch come together. I'm not going to lie. The Giants would hire Dennard Wilson as a defensive coordinator. And then into some other news. Geoffrey Mason passes away at the age of 85. As this USA Today article states, quote, Sports Broadcasting Hall of Famer Geoffrey Mason, who was the coordinating producer for the 1972 Munich Olympics and went on to a 5-decade career with multiple networks, has died at the age of 85. ESPN reported Mason died Sunday, January 25th in Naples, Florida. He died of natural causes, according to his family. End quote. The other article that I mentioned that he became a Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame member in 2010 after pretty much 4 decades plus of work. He had truly done a little bit of everything. As this quote puts it into further context, Jeff Mason was a friend and a colleague who had a storied career touching just about every corner of the sports television industry, said Bob Iger, CEO of the Walt Disney Company, which owns ABC and ESPN. He had a passion for the business, which was evidenced in his prodigious work ethic and the constant love and enthusiasm he exhibited on everything he worked on. End quote. That's a pretty telling one from the man himself. I mean, truly, at the end of the day, if you are going to be in that kind of realm and not just honing in on a specific element of things, but trying to work with and trying to learn about multiple over that time in one fell swoop, you have to have a passion for it. You have to have an enthusiasm for doing so. Like, there are people who will take those kinds of jobs on and, definitely be, like, excited and pumped about one particular thing that may draw them closer to working in a specific way or working for a specific company or taking on a specific job. And once that thing goes away, once that thing dissolves, there's nothing underlying, there's no substance under that specific desire that leads them to want to stay there long term and continue doing the same monotonous thing over and over and over again. Well, as Iger stated, essentially, that was not Jeff Mason in any sense of the word. If you work that hard with something like this, you have to love what you're doing. And it's clearly there. Now, as I mentioned as well in the earlier parts of the article, he was the coordinating producer for that Munich Olympic sequence in 1972. And as we all understand, as I covered in a project as well, in 1972, there was a hostage situation involving a Palestinian terrorist group in Black September, and they ended up taking the lives of 11 overall people, including 6 Israeli coaches and 5 Israeli athletes, or 5 athletes total, including a German athlete in that sequence, as these articles both detail. So that situation, obviously, we are talking about before any kind of media, when it comes to social media and things like that, are out at that point. You have this on ABC specifically, and the way in which it was, because these terrorists at the time, they were within 100 yards of the actual campus site for the news company at the time, as they're covering the entire thing. In fact, I think they also mentioned in one of these articles that they had German police storm the room to where Mason at that point had to, cut off the camera speed at this point. West German police stormed the control room and pointed guns at Mason's face, as this article from The Independent states. And as they also state, it is estimated that nearly 900 million people worldwide at some point viewed ABC's coverage. End quote. Just think about how remarkable that is. And also how horrifying it must have been at the time to know that damn near 900 million people at one point of time, and this is all the way back in 1972, they were able to witness what was happening in real time. Despite technology not even all really being in full effect like it is now, that is definitely something to marvel at. But again, as the situation unfolded, like you're seeing these people actively on the live feed, pretty much executing these hostages, taking them, holding them at gunpoint, moving across the buildings as well, in an attempt to potentially do even more damage than what ended up coming out of the situation. And you had McKay as well in this, which I had also detailed in a different project, trying his hardest, really, in what was a dire situation to continue relaying these news to all those people. It was a moment in time that was, again, horrific. Like, that is just a situation that still to this point is regarded as one of the worst things to ever unfold in that kind of setting with live footage ever, quite frankly. And yet, Mason, McKay, those guys are still resilient enough to do their due diligence and alert the masses about it as it was happening. So that alone would make pretty much anybody involved in that a legend. Which is why, as this USA Today article also states, and also the Independent article, Mason served as a consultant on the feature film September 5 about the Olympic massacre. And it was one of 8 total Olympics he worked for ABC, end quote. I was actually trying to watch that film when it came out. I never got a chance to. But it was only right for the man himself, at that point, if he was involved in the entire thing, it was only right for him to have a voice in how the film and the real life events would be portrayed on screen. It's only right. So, from that standpoint, again, like that already is a pretty damn good thing to have on your resume. And again, clearly, if that's what he was most known for, that's for a good reason. But there's a lot more to it. As the article from the Independent states, quote, Mason's career was largely spent with ABC and ESPN, but he also worked for NBC, Fox, NFL Network, and other television entities. He began as a production associate at ABC Sports in 1967, working on Wild World of Sports and the 1968 Winter and Summer Olympics. Over the years, he earned 24 Emmy Awards and was inducted into the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame in 2010. He also worked on Super Bowl 25, Monday Night Football, the World Series, horse racing's Triple Crown, the Indy 500, and the FIFA Men's and Women's World Cup tournaments. He is also known for his coverage of the 1986 and 87 America's Cup from Fremantle, Australia, end quote. So yeah, that quote that I mentioned, that Bob Iger relayed, that is definitely the description of Mason in this case. That's a perfect descriptor. He was truly damn near everywhere. Any sport you could think of, any kind of event in these sports that you could think of, he had some involvement in covering, in broadcasting. That is just wild. But again, there's truly an enthusiasm that you have to possess in order to experience all that and combine that work behind the scenes with the on-screen product time and again and still be regarded as one of the best to do it. Now, again, with what we've detailed today, you would hope that that is actually the truth, that he did have, natural causes be the true reason there for his untimely passing. And you would hope that there's nothing suspicious at play. And if that does stand, it was well earned. I mean, he's done just about everything that one could do in a lifetime. And again, that's definitely something that people should take a lot of pride in when it comes to those who were around him for this time, whether it be close friends, whether it be relatives, or to be colleagues. Gotta pay homage to something like that. Simply put, the Lions, to transition, would hire Mike Kafka to fill an offensive assistant role. As this quote from Sports Illustrated states, the exact nature of Kafka's new role is not known. Still, Kafka's landing with the Lions comes as a little surprise, given that he interviewed for the team's offensive coordinator role, which eventually went to Drew Petzing, formerly the Arizona Cardinals offensive coordinator under since fired head coach Jonathan Gannon. End quote. Kafka was another one of these names that were in the potential market for a head coaching job. But the Lions, after interviewing the man and hiring Petzing in terms of the actual offensive coordinator for the team, they still decided to take a shot and having Kafka on their staff. And he's going to have a pretty valuable role in that organization. It's interesting that they still don't know what exactly, but I'm sure he will also, in a way, have some influence in the play calling. It would just be hard to suggest otherwise. The fact that he was able to produce what honestly was a very good offense for the Giants this season, despite the litany of injuries that they had suffered on that roster, that is a pretty impressive display of just exactly what he can do with a football team. So, again, they need to figure out what role. It would be good to know exactly what, rather than just saying high-ranking offensive staff role. But it is well-deserved for the man. And the Lions, again, after a down year in that regard, they're trying to re-up. I still question having Petzing there as the de facto offensive coordinator, but by bringing in Kafka, they might try to sharpen some things up a little bit. Like, now we're talking if we're the Lions. We're trying to get back on the right track. Okay, that's a solid move to have for them. Totally. I'm with that. 100%. The Commanders would hire Daronte Jones, essentially promote him. He was their defensive backs coach, and now he's their defensive coordinator. Now, again, they've already fired Joe Wood Jr. to this point, and I suppose that they were looking for another, at that point, defensive coordinator to take over the job. They did probably have some other guys in mind, but instead they selected to hire from within. Again, it would be hard to gauge him as a D-back coach, but I will say that in terms of their actual cornerback room, outside of Sandersville, they leave a little bit to be desired out there. It's just, yeah, they have to find a way to truly fill out that cornerback room. Truly. because it puts him in a tough spot. Like, yes, you want Jones to be able to coach up those guys specifically on how to play the position. But at the same time, if they, as personnel on the team, are generally not that good, how much can you expect Jones to do? I'm not sure. But it's definitely could go down as a solid hire. I mean, it's definitely much different than them. Well, I ain't gonna, let me rephrase that. It's not much different from them hiring David Blau and promoting him to offensive coordinator after being on the staff for the past 2 seasons. Not too much different from that. Like, if we're going to have all these guys just leave out or part ways with us, well, hey, maybe we can take the right step back to reasonable success by hiring from within. And speaking of that, for the last piece of news here, the Bills earlier today would hire Joe Brady as their next head coach. Yes, that Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator that is credited, honestly, with turning Josh Allen into an MVP caliber guy. That Joe Brady is now the new head coach of this team. I'm definitely not surprised by it. You've been hearing it get thrown out there that they could always hire from within. Seeing as Joe Brady was able to accomplish that, and seeing as the Bills have had good offenses over the past 2 seasons. Yes, they have their limitations. But honestly, from where they were at throughout that 2020, take you back to that Monday Night Football game against the Broncos in 2023, if I'm not mistaken. And it's like, bruh, oh my gosh. They fired Ken Dorsey after that game, if y'all remember. Because at that point, again, it's not like the Bills were a terrible team, but they were meddling. They were struggling out there to find their rhythm offensively. And, yes, it took a little bit of luck with a penalty in that game for them to lose it on a Will Lutz field goal. But, man, I mean, hey, bro. Still, it just was not great for them. And so they made the decision to do this. Yes, November 13th, 2023. A few days later, they choose to hire Joe Brady. And, I mean, from then on, honestly, you've gotten nothing but great play from Josh Allen, especially in the regular season. Nothing but great play. Overall, when it comes to being more efficient with the football, cutting down on the turnovers, and just truly unlocking some of the game-breaking abilities that he has as a player over this course of time. That's what Joe Brady's been able to do with him. Now, again, as a true head coach, with him now being responsible for a full roster, a roster that around Josh Allen does still need work. It ain't going to be perfect, but man, there's a chance, for something new. Especially with me actually watching that press conference with Bean and Pegula, as ridiculous as it was. If the goal's to not hit the proverbial playoff wall anymore, maybe they believe that Brady ultimately can get them over the hump. Again, in his first season, it's probably a long shot. And you only have so much of Josh Allen left. So you want to be careful with that. But, hey, at least on the surface, as it's happened just today, a damn good move for them, honestly. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.